Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Chillport Podcast, episode 281. I'm Benjamin Yoder, here today, back on a normal weekend day recording, so I'm not, recording this on a Wednesday, although I think last week, I wasn't quite sure what happened, but it looks like maybe the podcast was, maybe available way earlier than it should have been. I didn't notice it until after I had gotten back home, and it showed that, it had published technically on the same day as the last podcast, which makes me think for some reason I published it in the past, essentially. So it may have been available all week or something. I don't know. I didn't look at my phone to figure that out. So either way, whatever. It happened. Time, move on with my life. So anyway, the reason I was out the last couple weeks, one was the camping trip, which we talked about last week. But then I went up to Portland Retro Game Expo this last weekend. So that was a fun, good time. Didn't really do a lot there in terms of the actual show. My main concern was talking to three people, and I wanted to talk to Jeremy Parrish, but I was not able to see him, and that's fine. I think the question with Jeremy was probably the least important kind of thing. But I did want to talk to Frank Cifaldi, mainly around Dojin preservation. So if you don't know, I've had conversations with people in the community before about uploading Dojin games to archive.org, especially ones that just seem to not be available on the internet. But there's a lot of kind of weird ethical questions with that. I don't really mind companies so much and uploading their stuff so much because, it's a company, right? But when it comes to individuals, I feel a little weirder about that because it's somebody's own project. And there's kind of the preservation aspect of it, of uploading it. But then also if they decide to sell it later or something in the case of the X68000 Club, they still sell their discs that include their stuff from the 2000s, and those people who made those games I assume are long gone, but they still charge for that disc and everything. So yeah, I don't know, it's always kind of a weird thing, and I didn't really get a great answer when I was talking to him. It's not it wasn't a bad answer, it was kind of a make your own decision about it kind of thing. We can't really tell you the ethics, but I feel like the general impression was hey, make an effort to contact the person, and then if you don't get a response, live your life, essentially, right? How much damage can really be done kind of thing for something like this. So I don't know. There's definitely going to be something that I will probably start to look at. There are a lot of games, I will say. So trying to figure that out on an individual by individual basis is the other thing. I also want to make sure that they're not selling it online or something like that, right? And there's some weird exceptions. If you remember when we played 24 Tokyo forever ago, I got a physical copy of 24 Tokyo that was from Comic Cat. I did not get it at Comic Cat. Somebody was selling it online, thank God. Because I could trying to find 24 Tokyo stuff in the modern day is nearly impossible. But anyways, but that version on that disc is slightly different from the version that's sold on DL's site. So part of me is I want to upload this to archive.org, but it is still largely the same video game. But I don't think Studio Busk is operational now. But I'm assuming if somebody buys 24 Tokyo on DL's site, that money is going somewhere, right? So there's kind of some weird stuff with that. And then episode 2 and 3, as far as I'm aware, are just completely unavailable online. So if I do get that I definitely would be more than willing, I think, to go ahead and upload it, just because I don't think that thing will ever appear anywhere ever again. I only know of one person who has it, and they're Japanese, and trying to have that conversation is a difficult thing if you can't actually speak any Japanese, right? So anyways, it was a good conversation. And then Frank had to go run off somewhere, so I talked to Kelsey a little bit, and I think she kind of gave me she was the one who kind of recommended reaching out and checking the emails, and even if they're old, maybe just sending an email and seeing what happens kind of thing. So anyways, we'll see how it goes. And then I also talked to Chris Kohler. I had some questions about, he has books that he writes about video games, and look, I'm just not a big reader. I buy books with the greatest intentions. I bought that Iwata book or whatever, and I just never read them. The reason why the Reggie book happened at all is because he had an audiobook. So I talked to Chris a long time ago, being hey, you can do an audiobook? And at the time he was yeah, maybe. But now it seems pretty likely there will not be audiobooks, which kind of stinks. Because I think Chris is pretty good when it comes to speaking. I guess I don't really know how he sounds when he reads content. But, I think Chris Kohler is a fairly notable person in the game industry, and like having that kind of like firsthand reading from him, I think would be something that'd be valuable. But he's got other jobs and other stuff going on, so just because it would be a good thing to do doesn't necessarily mean that's where you want to spend your time, right? So then I talked about some Chibi Robo stuff too, because some of the community in the Chibi Robo community asked me about some statue that was like posted on like his Twitter at some point. And then the statue got delisted from Twitter, and then you're like, why did this get delisted, kind of thing, is the whole thing. And really the answer was just, Chris was like, I wipe my social media every time I change jobs. So anyways, it was basically that was the main thing. I just wanted to go talk to those few people. There's some panels there. I don't know. None of them really jumped out at me as like, I really want to learn about this topic kind of thing. But I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, where I personally kind of feel like I'm consuming less and less video game content from other people. I think that part of that is probably just, I'm kind of doing my own thing so much right now that like when I'm done doing my thing, I kind of don't want to just jump right into listening to somebody else do exactly what I was doing, but with some other franchise, right? So there's definitely things that interest me for sure, but I'm not regularly consuming anybody's like YouTube videos or something like that anymore. So I think panels kind of have a similar feeling with that, where it's like, I don't really know if I want to go to any of these that much. And the majority of the panels I would have gone to were on Sunday, and I only went to Portland Retro Game Expo on Saturday. So, I didn't bring a lot of space with me though, just because of the whole situation in terms of like what I did for my lodging and stuff like that. I went to like a hotel first, but then went to a friend's house after that. But like, because I had to carry my stuff around at Portland Retro Game Expo, I couldn't use a traditional carry-on for the plane or anything like that, or unless I wanted to carry the carrier on around the convention floor. So I just had like a backpack and wasn't a lot of space. So I picked up like a MediaVision PS2 game that's called like Heavy Metal Thunder, which kind of looks neat. I picked up a few Game Boy games that were import games. All these games are import games, the ones I'm talking about right now. The Game Boy games are mostly like kind of games for girls. There's like one that was like Dr. Lin. There's another one that was, I forget what it was. It was some kind of anime game. I don't remember the name of the series or whatever, but it was very like kind of games for girls looking. And then there was another title that I wasn't quite sure what it was. So I just yeah, they were cheap. I just went ahead and picked them up basically. Just like these little labels look cute. So at some point I'll sit down and really start to look at them. But for now I just kind of grabbed them just because I was like, I'll check this out. So picked it up and we'll see. I'll probably put them in at some point. I want to play the Sanrio game that I got recently featuring the little, I don't know if he's a dog, cinnamon roll or something. It's a bunny or a dog. I think it's a dog, but it looks like a bunny to me. So anyways, maybe some irresponsible purchases there, unfortunately. I was working on the panels that I'm doing for like KomoriCon, and one of the things I said in that panel or have added to the presentation is just like really making sure you make a connection with the games you buy. I think it's like kind of a bad thing if you buy a game and then like you can't really remember what that game is sometimes. So the fact that I was like sitting there doing that with some of the Game Boy games is like, maybe that was a bad idea. Maybe I shouldn't have purchased those games, because now I'm like, I can't even remember exactly what caught my eye that made me pick it up. I'm sure if I looked at the label, I would remember, but So that, and I got a Soul Bubbles for the DS because that's like a game that I was always kind of interested in. I believe you use the touch screen to kind of like direct a bubble on screen and use, I think, the microphone to kind of blow into it, and that kind of like pushes the bubbles around on screen. It always looked like a fun way to use the DS. I'm always about like using that hardware as much as possible with like systems like the DS and the Wii U. So that was one of those games that always seemed like it was a good job. I did a good job with that, but at the time I just didn't have nearly as much money. I'm sure it probably got cheap at some point, but now it's around like Portland Retro Game Expo, I saw like 5 copies for like $30. So I was like, I'll pick it up. So it was the thing I kept thinking about, probably just because I saw it so much. But yeah, and that was pretty much it for Portland Retro Game Expo. I pretty much left around like 3 o'clock that day. There was like the little Blockbuster thing. I didn't really get into that despite, growing up going to Blockbusters. I don't know. It is kind of just like, well, this kind of looks like a Blockbuster, I suppose. So I didn't really like feel a lot about it. It was in collaboration with the last Blockbuster video. I forget where that's located, if that's in Oregon or somewhere else. But so they were selling like, membership cards and stickers and hats and all this stuff. So That was a little thing there. And then they had like in the museum section, they had like a Nintendo Power Art gallery and then like some Pac-Man stuff going on. Although there was let me see, I actually have the flyer right over here. There's the Shiro Media Group. They had like a Sega Saturn room there where they just had a bunch of Sega Saturns set up. I'm curious where they got all those Sega Saturns from. I'm like, if they just have them or if they had to like, get them from somewhere else. But yeah, they had like maybe like 20 or so Sega Saturn machines set up with like various controllers and things like that. And you could just go in there and play them. And they had a panel, I believe. But the big thing is I think they're launching a magazine, Shiro Magazine. So I'll put a link in the podcast notes. But yeah, they have like a Sega Saturn podcast. And they have a bunch of like stuff they do around the Sega Saturn. So I was kind of curious about that mainly because I do want to have some like greater plans for the PCFX going forward. And something like that could definitely be some kind of inspiration. I did ask them some questions. I probably should have told them what I was doing. Sometimes I just don't want to sit there and be like, hello, I'm doing a thing. Here's my project. Especially when it's like not started right. Because you don't want to sit there and like promise a bunch of stuff to somebody and be like, well, now I'm gonna flake out of this kind of thing, right? I don't expect to flake out of it, but yeah, it's kind of weird when you're like sitting there and like, I don't have a thing started, but let me tell you about it kind of thing. I feel like personally, it probably made sense to be like, hey, I'm planning to do this kind of thing. That, and I don't necessarily know if like, the Sega Saturn stuff would super apply to PCFX, just given how limited the Saturn's or the PCFX library is and kind of the different focus of it. So anyways, so that was pretty much the time at the actual convention floor though. And then I went to my friend's house. We played some games there. The one thing I did do while I was there, I don't know if I was like excited to do per se, but I did mess around with, he has like Pachinko machines in his basement. So he had the Castlevania Erotic Violence Pachinko machine. And then I saw him play a little bit of Saki. It's like the Mahjong anime. And I feel like I really need to someday just like sit down and really figure out Pachinko because there's so much visually that happens during Pachinko, but at the same time, it's like, I have no idea what's happening. And I feel like, I don't know if I'm tricking myself into feeling like there's more going on in Pachinko or not. Especially the Saki machine, it seemed like there was like some kind of Mahjong hands happening and some scores you were getting based off that. Where the Erotic Violence machine, I couldn't really figure out what was happening at all, really. I mean, it's really like a Pachinko slot machine, right? So you shoot the Pachinko balls up, they fall into the hole, and then the slots play, and then depending on what slots you get, some animation plays out, right? But like, there's a bunch of extra like little UI elements and lights that I don't know if they mean anything. You only have one button, so it's like, how much can you actually activate kind of thing. But I feel like when I play Pachinko, I'm often more confused than I understand things. I have like a Hokuto no Ken or Fist of the North Star Pachinko PS2 game as well, and a couple of like Sanyo Pachinko games on PS1, I feel like it's what they're called. And I feel like I just gotta figure it out. Like even if it's nothing, as long as I understand it's like nothing is happening, that's what I want. I want to be in a position where I feel confident to say, nothing is happening or something is happening, one or the other. So that was fun. So, but yeah, that was pretty much it. It was a pretty relaxing trip. Otherwise, not a lot going on, just hanging out with people. And yeah, hanging out at the convention. There's a couple different like podcasts I talked to. There's one podcast I talked to, and for the life of me, I cannot find the podcast card that they gave me. So I need to do some digging around my wallet and see if I shoved it in there, or maybe just go to the website and see if I can find, what podcasts were there and see if any of them ring a bell. Because there's somebody I had a nice conversation with there too. So, anyways. I think that's really all there is to say about it, though. Like really not a lot happened. I mean, I feel like that's true for most Portland Retro Game Expo shows. Like, for me, as somebody traveling out of town, the impression I get is that, like from a place that has, like, in Las Vegas, I can buy games from retro game stores here all the time, right? If I want to. There's quite a few of them. Going to that kind of thing feels like more of a meeting up with people kind of thing, and I didn't know anyone there, really, so... I hit the people I wanted to talk to, but, that's like people that I just know from, podcasts and stuff, not because I have a actual relationship with them, right? So yeah, but before I went to Portland Retro Game Expo, I actually did sit down and play one game, and that was Samba de Amigo for the Nintendo Wii. Now, Samba de Amigo on the Wii, if for some reason you don't know what Samba de Amigo is, it is a rhythm game that was, I believe, originally an arcade game, but it got ported to the Dreamcast, and they have maraca controllers, right? So you shake these controllers, and there's motion sensors in them. So if you shake on the upper level, it hits like the upper notes. If you hit the middle level, it hits the middle notes, and there's a lower level, it's the lower notes. And the maracas, I've never played it, so hopefully I'm getting this right. But like the Dreamcast one, but there's like in the maracas, I believe there's like sand or whatever that makes the maraca noise and stuff. So you kind of have that tactile feeling of the stuff shaking around, and then also the motion control. So you're kind of going up and down. There's also like posing that happens too as well. So anyways, that's the Dreamcast version of that game. And so, it kind of made a lot of sense for them to make a Wii version of this game when the Wii came out. But it does feel very fueled by that, like, that Wii sentiment of like, hey, Wii motion control should be able to track all this stuff great. And so, it makes a ton of sense for you to bring Samba de Amigo to the Wii. My experience, it definitely feels like a game that had to have a lot of compromises, probably. I mean, again, I haven't played that original game, but the controller just doesn't quite feel up to the task, in my opinion. Now, I was reading some reviews online about it, and people were saying basically like, oh, some people would say it doesn't work at all, and some people said that there was like perfect accuracy. So I think a lot of it comes down to like actually tracking the player, comes down to being very specific with the angles of the Wii remote. So, like for the most part, the game itself is a very traditional career mode kind of game thing, right? You go in there, you play a bunch of songs, you get a ranking if you get out, and as long as you pass, you can keep going, and there's like 5 or 6 different difficulty levels or something like that. And it's all, in the maraca way, it's all like kind of, I guess, I don't know exactly where maracas are from, but it's like that kind of like Spanish, Mexican kind of music. I know like the only real songs in there I really knew is Mambo No. 5, and then the other songs I knew in there were just some of the extra Sega music that ended up in there. Like there's some Space Channel stuff in there from Space Channel 5, and then also I know the original Samba de Amigo song that because that was in Phantasy Star Online later on, but you basically just play through that. But yeah, the controllers themselves do a really good job of emulating kind of the feeling of shaking the maracas in some ways, as best you can for using something that's not a proprietary controller, right? So it has like a slight rumble every time you shake the Wiimote or the nunchuck. I guess the nunchuck probably wouldn't have rumble. I only use the 2 Wii remote mode just because I wanted to get the best accuracy possible. And so you get the little shake of the controller that kind of replicates the little like, sand or whatever that's in there that's shaking around. And then also if you have the speaker on the Wii remote turned on, which honestly most of the time I don't because for game recording stuff I have to turn it off, it makes a shaking noise. So it actually does a really good job of kind of emulating the feeling of using maracas, even though it's just, the standard Wii remote. And so it's like, it feels good to actually do the shake. And when it really works well, I think it's very successful in terms of like, with a lot of the slower songs specifically, it's really kind of easy to track. The real challenge I think comes from the fact that like, it's less about height and more about angle, it feels like, when it comes to the game figuring out where you are. So if you do like kind of go up, you kind of got to tilt the controllers back a little bit to kind of give it that angle and then shake up. And then in the middle, you have to kind of like hold the controllers straight up and then shake it that way. And then when you shake it down, you got to kind of point the controllers down and shake it that way. But when things start to get really fast, keeping track of the fact that you are angling the controllers correctly can get really difficult. So you'll go up and you'll shake, but you're still holding the controller in a way that it's like just the vertical up. So the game still kind of thinks you're just shaking in the middle space rather than the upper space. And it does seem like the game does a generally good job of tracking, what those angles are, but actually training yourself to make sure you're doing the right angles is really challenging. And the game does have a tutorial that kind of explains it all to you and shows you I don't know the Samba de Amigo's monkey's name, but him sitting there showing you what position you should have the Wii remotes in. But I feel like in a game like that, with how fast it gets and how quickly you have to kind of, by the end, start switching around between different notes or like doing these kind of like cross shakes where you're basically doing a middle shake and a higher shake on the left side of the screen, and you're kind of pointing over and like making sure you're tilting the controllers right and things like that. It becomes really challenging to keep track of that stuff. And then so obviously being a rhythm game, if you mess up, you kind of just mess up, right? And just kind of gets knocked off your score. And so while it's like, it feels good to play the songs, I think generally, and like I would probably recommend to people that they check out Samba de Amigo on the Wii. I don't think I would really recommend people try to like actually seriously play Samba de Amigo on the Wii. Just because I found that it was just a lot more of a headache to kind of make sure my form was, super, accurate. Now, I think there's a good argument, though, that, like, to some degree, normal rhythm games have this, too, where it comes to, like, pattern recognition and muscle memory that comes from that, right? So you see a pattern that comes up, and you don't even have to think about it. You just know the way you need to swipe your hands and stuff, and the order and the speed and all that stuff. And when you are just playing a rhythm game casually, that is not something you can really do super easily. So I think there is maybe some connection you can make there of like, once you get the muscle memory down of like where your hand should be, if you played Samba de Amigo for the Wii long term, you might be able to get there where you could like perfect every song reliably. But as somebody who's a casual rhythm game player, by the end of it, I definitely just kind of felt like there were some songs I kind of more or less gave up on. And what would happen is, like, if I failed the song enough, but I felt like it was just like me, like I just really couldn't get it tuned in, I would just kind of start, I hate doing this, but like randomly shaking to like I would kind of try to follow the song, but I would basically just kind of shake the whole time. And that would brute force myself through some songs, which is not the best way to play a game like that, but it would just make me move on. Because I felt like the difficulty level of songs, because of that tracking element, was not particularly consistent. So, like, the last song in the game was, like, way easier than the, like, middle game ooh la la, I forget what the song's called, but there's like one ooh la la song that I remember. But anyways, the Space Channel 5 song, one of the Space Channel 5 songs is literally, in my opinion, the hardest song in that game, and I just eventually brute forced it, as much as I love Space Channel 5 soundtrack. So there's like a bunch of mini games in there too, but I just kind of ignored those. It's really the music game aspect that I think is really the focus. And it just has a great looking style that is the problem with all rhythm games, I feel like, where like there's so much stuff, maybe not so much stuff happening on screen, but there's a lot of like bubbly graphics and things like that, right? Of these characters all bouncing around, and there's Mii's with trumpets or something. Maybe they don't have trumpets, maybe they just have the maracas, actually. I feel like there were characters with trumpets bouncing around at some point. But, this kind of really colorful, bubbly background that's just like super, super, Sega Dreamcast kind of aesthetic. But, you as the player, you're staring at the 6 points on screen where you need to shake the maracas, and that's it. That's like your pure focus. So all that other stuff in the background is kind of lost on you, except for the beginning and the end of the song. So it's more for, somebody who's watching you play kind of thing. So, but yeah, I just don't know what they could have done more to kind of, make that game work with the technology that's in the original Wii remotes. The accelerometers in the Wii remote just aren't quite the greatest thing. But clearly people were able, like, based off what I was reading online, people were able to make that game work. So maybe just if you decide to pick up Samba de Amigo on the Wii, just know your mileage is probably going to vary a little bit on that. And I personally, for me, I'd say maybe like, it felt like maybe 80 to 90% accurate, if not a little bit more than that, and just handle it casually, because I can't really rely on the rest of those notes. I kind of felt the same way about Gabriella's Ghostly Groove, where I, at some point, was like, I don't trust this game enough to let me, for me to really go and try to, the Gabriella Ghostly Groove on the WiiWare specifically, actually, not the 3DS one, but I don't trust the motion controls enough to really dedicate myself to this game and really expect to get like a high score on a song kind of thing. And thankfully the game is very, very generous. As long as you get a C, you can pass a song. So that's all that really matters. So anyways, very cool game. And I think it's definitely worth giving a look if you're kind of looking at different ways people use the Wii remote and kind of like interesting styles, even if like it didn't really 100% translate over, I feel like, from what probably what I believe the maracas are like. Again, I have not actually played Samba de Amigo using the maracas, so. Welcome to Patreon time. Paul Daniel, Henry Dagger, Jillian, and the one and only Discreet Thank you so much for supporting me. As per usual, there's bonus videos every other week. At least that's been the case. I am honestly, in general, I'm kind of slowing down the YouTube channel at the moment while I kind of replan things. I think the Patreon stuff will continue to go every 2 weeks though, because you guys are paying for that content. And I kind of feel like you should get something for me taking your money, right? And like the stuff that's going up on there is not like, the hardest stuff to make, right? It's usually pretty straightforward. So, I believe you'll continue to receive that content every couple weeks for that. Yeah, so bonus videos, for $5 every month, basically. One thing you can also do if you are in the Patreon group is ask a podcast question. So if you want to ask a question, there's a post that goes up every Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, if I schedule it correctly. And you can go ahead and add your question to a comment, and you can basically, insert a podcast question. So Jillian pre-prepares these for us just in case nobody sends anything. So for Jillian's question this week, we have: before the internet or as a kid, what sort of creative video game works did you make? This is kind of hard for me to remember because, like, honestly, I had the internet very early on as a kid. So, like, I kind of don't have a lot of memory of before the internet kind of thing. Like, I probably was getting on a PC around, like, 95 kind of thing. And that's when I really started to navigate around a PC and start playing games on there probably. So I was, like, 5 years old probably around then. And then, around the early 90s, my dad, I don't know exactly what year, but my dad got on broadband very early, which that's kind of accurate for him. Like he generally, he was working in the IT business and stuff like that. So, and he likes to kind of like stay on top of things generally when it comes to that stuff. So if he gets something in the area that's like, specifically, interesting from a technological standpoint, or like it's a huge benefit, he will pay the money to get it, kind of thing, right? That's what I feel like, at least. That's my impression of how he's made purchasing decisions over the years. And so broadband was something that was like really introduced to me early in life, and cable internet kind of thing. And so I've always kind of had like this ongoing internet connection that I haven't had to worry about like the time I spend on it and things like that very much at all, kind of thing. So anyways, so I've been exposed to the internet the majority of my life. So there's not a lot of like pre-internet stuff I can really answer for that. But what I can say, that there are things that I've worked on in my life that were never intended for the internet, if that makes sense. Like I just made stuff because I just wanted to make it, kind of thing. But a lot of this stuff is usually just kind of like little stupid things that were not like, I wasn't doing a lot of like, I guess what you'd call, I don't know, like archiving or like, writing articles. Like the stuff I do on this website is not really reflected in that old stuff. I think the bigger thing is I just like making stupid stuff usually. So a couple of things were, I don't remember how involved I was in this, but like I remember we were sitting behind my TV at my uncle's house, and we had a tape recorder, and he had Final Fantasy Mystic Quest in there. We'd go to different areas in Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, and we would record the background music, and then we would put like lyrics to them, or make up lyrics, improvise lyrics basically. And so we had these tapes of us with Final Fantasy Mystic Quest music, just like making up different lyrics and stuff. And it was all really stupid things. I'm trying to remember if I can think of anything off the top of my head, but like actually trying to sing them properly on the podcast is a whole other thing. And I think that led into, if you ever saw like the video games, like Music Ruined series, I think that probably came out of that whole exercise that we did, where I just like made Ocarina of Time sound effects to recreate the title screen song and stuff like that. So, but yeah, pre-internet, that's something we did. I've built out a fake TV once. So like, we had these little black CRTs that were at my mom's house. They're little cheap TVs basically. And we got one for my sister and one for me. And so we used these CRTs for a very long time. But we used to play Final Fantasy 11 on it, and so like it kind of looked like an old school computer setup. You know, when people used to use like TVs for their computers, basically, or I guess nowadays we're back in that spot in some degree. But like this was kind of when TVs were not really connected to computers very often, and so I had a CRT on my desk, and I played Final Fantasy 11 on it almost exclusively. And so I had like a little, mouse and keyboard setup kind of thing, because you didn't play the PS2 version of Final Fantasy 11 with the controller. At least that I feel like very few people played with the controller, at least in the US. I don't know about Japan. And then so it looked like a normal desk setup, honestly, and just with the PS2 as a computer instead. So I recreated that TV using some construction paper and a box, and it was not even the box was not something that I probably should have been messing with, because it was a gift from my sister from my dad. And so the box showed up at our house, and I had like 2 weeks until my sister was coming out to visit for Christmas or something. And I took this box and I dressed up this box that my dad sent. And then I put the black cardboard paper all over it to replicate the black plastic. And then I took a screenshot from Final Fantasy 11 and I like glued that into the center of the screen kind of thing. And then that was the little like Final Fantasy 11 monitor again, which my sister played on that same thing, so she knew what was going on with it. So I also made like a little cat once as well. That was like a present where, it was a longer box. And so I wrapped it up and I gave it little cat ears, and I took some cardboard or paper that I like folded up into squares or something, and basically made those little feet for the cat, and it had a little tail, so it was a little cat present. So that was kind of fun. I'm trying to think if there's anything else though. The thing that keeps coming to my mind is that we did make a list of like Animal Crossing, like KK Slider songs. And I remember like managing this list of like who had what kind of thing, so we can maximize our KK Slider song acquisition. So like I had colored pencils, I think. I wonder if I still have it actually. Maybe like my memory is that I had colored pencils at least. And so we would check off the colored, like the different names, or the different songs along with the name, and check it off with colored pencils of like who has it. I'm actually gonna go check that. I'm curious if I have that still. Let me go look. Hopefully I didn't throw it away. Well, if I had it, it's not there anymore, or it might be in like another folder somewhere, but it's not in the actual Animal Crossing game case, unfortunately. So anyways, yeah, I think it was like some of the things I really did, but I think, I was so connected to the internet as a kid that a lot of things I did ended up on the internet in some way. So yeah, anyways, thank you again, Jillian, for that question. And thank you guys again for supporting me on this channel. I appreciate it. And I believe there's a Kaminazo video coming up next for the Patreon for the bonus video. So I'll double check on that. I'm not 100% sure, but anyways, we're going to wrap up the show with a very, very tiny news section here. Basically, I have one update and then one game that I think was announced a while ago, but I just was not aware of it, but it's very much in our section here, our wheelhouse here. The first news update, though, is about Miraculous Ladybug, The Rise of the Sphinx. This game we talked about a little while back ago. I watched the first season of Miraculous Ladybug, and I did enjoy it quite a bit. And I was kind of curious about this game because, I like licensed games and things like that. But when I saw that this game was announced, I was a little worried because the description sounded like kind of a generic beat 'em up. And I just don't really have a lot of interest in a game like that, probably, at least in the way that it's described. And unfortunately, they did put out a trailer. I think it's a launch trailer, actually. So the game is already out, I believe. And it just kind of looks like a generic kind of isometric beat 'em up with like 2-player support. It reminds me a lot of like GameCube era licensed games of just kind of like this straightforward kind of go through a level and then mash one button kind of thing, and then maybe a character has like a special. Like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one is the one I think the most of, although I never played that full game. I only ever played a demo of it. So it just didn't look particularly inspiring, but I will say like visually, I think it looks pretty good, from like a model perspective. I do think the animations look a little lackluster. Like there's little scenes with like the characters animating and stuff, but like their faces don't update or animate at all. So like stuff like that looks kind of weird. So it does look kind of budget, but I do appreciate that they are making it. I might take another look at it at some point when I think there is actually gameplay out there now. So I probably should take a look at, some of the more longer term gameplay aspects of it. But from the trailer they showed, it looked pretty much like a mash a A button through a bunch of Miraculous Ladybug environments. And each character has different animation sets, but like nothing really makes them stand apart. So that's unfortunate. I'm sure it's a fine video game, though. Or at least I assume it's a fine video game. I obviously have not looked at it playing, but from the trailer, it looks fine. And the last game I want to talk about here real quick is Fitness Runner. So Fitness Runner is a game, I believe, from XFit, I think is the publisher, and they're releasing this on Switch. And it is yet another Switch fitness game. Those games have, been steadily coming in after, Fitness Boxing was really successful, and then also, Ring Fit Adventure. And I do like that a lot of these have like different styles and aesthetics to them, where Fitness Boxing is more straightforward and kind of realistic, although it has a lot of things going for it from like a character perspective. But Ring Fit being a very like kind of fantasy RPG kind of thing. So Fitness Runner kind of fits a different space where it's this kind of, I guess you'd say, futuristic sports game in some ways. It kind of reminds me of Reboot a little bit, if you're familiar with that, like early CG animated series on TV, but it's a lot of just like different, like, hoverboarding games kind of thing, or like doing running or jumping between different things. And while it's a little hard to say how successful it is as an exercise game, what did kind of surprise me was how much they're really asking the player to extend their disbelief or something like that. I don't know if that's the right word I'm looking for, because as far as I can tell, it only has Joy-Con support in your hand. So there are like leg straps for, the Nintendo systems that you can have. But I did not see any of the promotional material showing that. So people just had the two Joy-Cons in their hands. However, all the posing in game shows like a full body pose. And so it looks like they're asking you to do, these more full movement kind of things. And you can always kind of, trick motion controls in general, right? But I thought it was kind of interesting that you're doing a lot of this like lower body movement, but the game doesn't seem to be like kind of tracking it in any way kind of thing. Although I will say that like Fitness Boxing had a little bit of that, where they like ask you to kind of duck, come down and do uppercuts. But, depending on the angle of the Joy-Con, I think they had ways to track that. But, you could probably just stand there and just do normal uppercuts. But they had like little ducking things you'd do in there too that necessarily wasn't being 100% tracked, right? So anyways, it has kind of a neat aesthetic to it, although I believe it is a full-priced video game, and it has a physical copy in Japan at least. I did not see any mention of a US release. I will say, now that I'm thinking about it, I did look into this like last week, so I haven't seen if there's been any updates since then. And I think the game was announced like a month ago, so we're not like, on some kind of, breaking news cycle here with Fitness Runner, but it was a game that I just hadn't seen yet before, and it kind of fits within that kind of neat fitness, experience I think that the Switch has been kind of fostering, and to some degree. And I'm really happy that like Fitness Boxing and stuff like that has been so successful, because I'm a big fan of like Wii era style games, and I feel like a lot of those kind of games have been, only somewhat represented on the system, but fitness stuff seems to be pretty consistent. I've heard that like VR systems have a lot of fitness stuff there too. I really probably should try a VR headset or something like that at some point, like maybe get a Quest or something that, is just going to be easy to set up kind of thing at some point, but I just have a really hard time justifying it, unfortunately. So but I thought it looked like a really neat looking game. It's got a nice style to it. So if you're interested in fitness games on the Switch, I'm going to link their website in the notes if you are interested. Also, I was kind of surprised to find out recently. So if you, I guess, familiar with, I'm asking you a question. Respond to my question out loud right now. Are you familiar with the developer LandHo? No? Is that you said no there? They're the developers of Pen Triathlon, and I also picked up their game Dragon Blade recently. There's been a few other games I think that I've played that are from LandHo, and I had kind of assumed they were dead. Developers from like the 2000s or something like that don't stick around a long time usually, or at least like smaller developers like that, I feel like. But they're still doing stuff. But recently I found out that they worked on Wii Cheer as well. So like, oh, that's interesting. They worked on a bunch of stuff actually. They're still putting out a bunch of games. And one of the games they put out was I think it's called like Fitness Sphinx or something like that. And we talked about this on the podcast a long time ago. It was a very budget looking kind of fitness boxing clone, I guess you would say. It just looked like you were getting less for the cost of the game versus fitness boxing. So I really didn't have a lot of interest in it because it just seemed like a worse version of fitness boxing, which who knows, maybe it's fine. It's like Fitness Sphinx or something like that. But anyways, so I was looking into them and I was just like looking just so many games that I am aware of that LandHo has made. And I just like was not even aware of that to some degree. Like I kind of just know them as the Pimpen Triathlon developer. So anyways, that'll be it for this week. Thank you guys for coming. OneControlHorde.com is the website. This week on the show, on the main channel, I say main channel because I'm probably going to split channels at some point at the end of this year. But this week we're going to have a Doraemon video. I've been pushing it off for like 2 months because other videos kept getting in the way. It's a video about Doraemon for the Nintendo 64, a video I've been wanting to do a very long time. And I just kind of talk about it like within the context of Mario 64 a little bit, because there's some things I feel like Doraemon does better than, Mario 3D platformers in general. There's things that I think that game does a little bit better than Mario 64 games in some way. Well, maybe it has interesting approaches to those ideas. Maybe it doesn't necessarily do them better, but I think there are things that a game like a Mario, 3D Mario they could learn from like a Doraemon game for the 64. But anyways, so that's coming up this week. And then I mentioned it on Twitter, but for going forward for the rest of this year, things are probably going to slow down a little bit. We're going to mainly focus on the podcast and the stream because I've got 2 panels coming up that I'm working on, and they're not coming together as well as I was hoped they would. And then I also have some stuff going on in the background with like channel splitting stuff and things like that I need to worry about. And it's also a little bit of a busy time for me in terms of normal work as well. So I'm going to kind of slow things down. I don't think I'm going to post any podcast highlights up or any kind of like in-between videos between, whatever the next major feature video will be. But the 2 panels for sure will go up by the end of this year. And then from there, anything else that goes up, I'm just kind of like play by ear kind of thing. But mainly it's going to be the podcast and the stream for the rest of the year. So tune in for those, and I hope you enjoy them. And glad to be back, and I'll be out again at the end of the month where we're going to KomoriCon. Not the end of the month, next month we'll be going to KomoriCon. So I will be there in Portland yet again for that show. So anyways, thank you guys again so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I hope you guys have a great week. Bye!